Welcome to the Domain Name Wire podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Alleman, and this is episode number 576. A year ago, Nova Registry, the company behind .link, announced its plans to apply for 200 top-level domain names in the round that opens this year. Today, Vaughn Liley, the general manager of Nova Registry, comes on the show to give an update about the company's plans. We have a wide-ranging conversation about running top-level domains, how the 2026 round will be different from last time, the policy behind Web3 integrations, and much more. Now, I have a lot of people on the show who are top-level domain consultants, and they provide great information, but they also have a vested interest in promoting their viewpoint to get new clients. Well, Vaughn has nothing to sell you here, and I think it's great to get his perspective on what he expects, especially after his many years in the domain name industry. First, a word from our sponsor. Our sponsor this week is Salve.com. Transfer your domains to Salve and save. Transfer.com domain names for $9.65 and .org domains for only $10.52. Plus, Salve doesn't raise your prices a lot at renewal time. Right now, .com renewals are just $10.15. Start transferring your domains to Salve and saving money. Go to salve.com/DNW/transfer. That's sav.com/DNW/transfer. Let's run through some of the news in the domain business from the past week before we chat with Vaughn. First up, GoDaddy announced earnings last week, and Wall Street wasn't happy. GoDaddy has been caught up in a hysteria over how AI will impact incumbent businesses. Many of its tech peers have also been hammered recently, but GoDaddy stock has been on a decline for about a year, losing over half of its value. While people are understandably concerned about how AI will impact their shareholdings, GoDaddy has also been quick to embrace the technology in its business. The majority of its code is now written by AI, and it's starting to use the technology more to handle support and sales. Escrow.com parent Freelancer Limited also reported earnings last week. The dollar volume of transactions it has handled in its escrow business declined for the fourth straight year, although domains continued to be a strong point, and Q4 showed uplift from the other quarters last year. Escrow.com hit record profitability, though, thanks to increased fees. Top-level domain company Radix reported its second half of 2025 premium domain results, and it was an incredible half for the company. It nearly doubled the results from the second half of 2024. Out of about 4,300 premium registrations, 1,075 were .tech domains. .fun was in second place and .space in third. You can get a link to that full report, read about some reverse domain name hijacking cases, and also read about my experience buying domains on Adam's wholesale market and more stories at domainnamewire.com. So go check that out. But now let's chat with Vaughn Liley. My guest this week is Vaughn Liley. He is the general manager of Nova Registry. Vaughn, welcome back to the show.
Hi, Andrew. A pleasure to be here. Thank you.
So about a year ago, I had Yoni Belasov on the show. Yoni is the founder of Nova Registry, and he was talking about Nova's plans to apply for 200 new top-level domains in the round that opened this year. This was back, I think this was when Seattle ICANN was going on, actually, when that was published. So I'm curious, about 12 months later, have your plans changed?
Not really.
Okay.
No real material change. We are still planning to apply for 200 TLDs, plus or minus. It may be a little bit over and it may be a little bit under, but around 200, that's where we've pegged the number.
Okay. So I'm curious too, one thing that both you and Yoni have talked about is kind of your theses here, or your thesis on kind of top level domains, where the opportunity is. I think that was mostly around, hey, it's not necessarily through the registrar channel, right? This is through other types of partnerships and distribution. Is that still your thinking?
Yeah, well, I think it's a combination, to be honest. I think that the established distribution channels, so the regular registrars, do very well for our existing top-level domain.
.link, for those that aren't familiar.
Yes, .link. And we have high hopes for distribution of the new TLDs when they come online. But as an adjunct to that, we have been very busy developing new channels to market for .link. And that is where we have created relationships with SaaS platforms, platform providers, that provide services that are highly relevant to .link. So, for example, link in bio, link shorteners, payment links, and the like. So effectively what they do is they take us one step closer to the registrant. And so by doing so, the actual name's typically has more meaning for us with .link. But those deals are augmented through domain resellers. So it's not a direct relationship between the registry and the SaaS platform. We augment those opportunities through reseller platforms. But that is very much part of our thinking, that we think there are new untapped markets and opportunities where TLDs are highly relevant to a particular audience, a segment of the market, a user base, where we can actually get traction a lot quicker than we might otherwise do if we were just peddling the TLD through the normal distribution channels. Because effectively what you end up doing is you're competing with all of the existing TLDs. That's further going to get exacerbated post-launch with new options available. So for us, it's about relevance, making sure that those TLDs find their way to market through relevant channels and platforms that are highly relevant to the TLDs themselves.
So give me an example of one of the kind of partnerships or distributions you have that's non-traditional right now with .link.
A partnership that's non-traditional.
Well, I mean, not through the registrar. So
if we looked at Ghost, for example, so ghost.org is actually a platform. It's a website builder, but it's aimed at professional journalists. I don't know if you've heard of it.
Yeah, it's an alternative to WordPress. Yes,
it is. And so when we first met Ghost, John O'Nolan, who is the CEO, at that particular point in time, they were not selling domains at all as part of their offering. We explained to John the business opportunity in terms of customer acquisition, how to migrate people from effectively a free plan to a paid plan, and how that can impact the stickiness of those customers and how it can positively impact lifetime value of that customer. So that, not necessarily an obvious one, because Ghost isn't one that springs to mind for a lot of people. But the way that we actually put that together was via Entry. So I think you've had Abe's story on.
Yes, yeah. They help connect SaaS, make that connection between registrars and SaaS businesses so that you don't have to go tinker with your DNS settings at the registrar, but you can get set up.
Correct. The one thing there's a certain irony in this, that the actual registrar behind all of that is actually Squarespace domains. So, a website builder, effectively Squarespace, or their domains business, is providing and powering the domains via Entry for ghost.org, and everybody seems very happy with the setup. So that is actually quite a non-traditional way of doing things, but everybody seems to like it, and the customers like it, the platform partners like it. It's good. It works well for everybody.
Talk to me a little bit. You have experience with .link, and this has been a great kind of test bed for you, obviously, if you're going to ramp up to 200 names. As far as the different registrars, you just mentioned Squarespace. Is there kind of a difference, for example, in premium sales or something like that, your premium price domains between registrars or the kind of the quality of the registration, that sort of thing?
We are starting to see a bit of a trend emerge, and we are seeing, so first of all, we've introduced some new premium tiers. Our business is in transition, right? So people might look at us from the outside and think, well, we're a fairly low cost domain. We're a good value at $7 wholesale. But actually, our premium business is thriving. And our premium business is thriving through some of the well-known registrars. People like Namecheap and Spaceship are doing particularly well. But also from a reseller perspective. So folks like Cloudflare, Name.com, and Squarespace. And that's where we see a slight difference. So where people are actually platform providers coming in, and so their customers are typically more disposed to paying perhaps a slightly higher increment for a name that they actually want, because it fits their business or their business model. Then it seems to work out, very well for everybody concerned, for us, for the registrar, and for the customer.
If someone's using Squarespace, kind of unique example, because now they are kind of also a domain registrar aside from their website building.
Well, yeah.
But
those two parts of their business are very distinct. So
yes.
For domain people, that is their primary focus.
I guess the point being, if you go into Cloudflare, you're probably setting up a website if you register through them. That's changing a little bit too. They're at cost pricing and that sort of thing. But the attach rates are maybe a little bit higher. If you're creating a website, you'd be willing to spend a little bit more for a domain.
I think that it's not just a website. I think the attach rate is our platform. So clearly you need a website to host your platform. But I think that is the nuance there, that the people coming in through the API at Cloudflare are actually service providers as well. I think
okay, right. Got it.
That makes a key difference.
One other interesting thing you're doing with .link, I saw some press release a while back about accepting a stablecoin payment. Specifically, was it USDC?
Yes, it was.
USDC from registries.
Correct.
So registrars obviously have to pay you, the registry, every time someone registers a .link domain name. What was the thinking behind offering this as a payment method? And has there been any uptake so far?
So first of all, just for clarity on that actually right now, Two Cows do our billing for us. They're our back-end service, our RSP. So they collect the money from the registrars. We wanted first mover advantage. And so we are the first registry operator to be offering registrars the option to pay in USDC. And the reason that we went down that route is clearly Yoni has got certainly a significant investment and interest in Web3, crypto and the like. But what we wanted to do was actually offer registrars an option to pay in USDC. So it gave them some level of flexibility, particularly in global markets. And the interesting point from our perspective is USDC is pegged 1-to-1 with the US dollar. So for registrars that are taking payments in USDC and other currencies, then we just thought it was a logical on-ramp to provide that as an option. That's where we're coming from. And it probably makes sense as it relates to the next round as well. So if we're going to be applying for TLDs that are relevant to those kinds of markets, then clearly we wanted to be able to offer that as a payment mechanism, a settlement mechanism for registrars. It doesn't change any of the obligations that they have with us. It's really only available to ICANN accredited registrars that have existing registry agreements with .link. But if you're not first, you're always second. And Yoni and I, we take great pride in trying to be first on a few things, right? Because we've basically built a reputation for innovation and partnerships. So that's what we're building the business on. And the decision to apply for the 200 TLDs actually predated the acquisition of .link. So we are effectively transitioning from a single TLD operator to a portfolio operator. And what we're really trying to do is put the rails in place to support our future business plan and future business model. That's really what it's all about.
How do you scale that? How do you go from 1 to 200 here? I mean, obviously you're running the show here. You've been doing partnerships specifically for one top level domain name. How do you scale that as a business?
It's a good question. First of all, we need to prevail in our applications, clearly. And we already have a plan in place to expand the team and to scale the team. That will hinge or focus on, business development deals where we've got new opportunities that will allow us to scale. We have got internally, we have a sort of a code, a mantra, ethos, whatever you want to call it. So we're committed to running our business with a small number of highly competent people. So we're ready to expand. We're ready to invest in the business, but we're not going to scale it just by throwing warm bodies at it because we don't think that's particularly smart. So it's a very carefully curated, well thought out plan to bring in high quality individuals that can actually help us scale and support the business. We're also looking at, as part of our application round, some of the work we're doing ourselves and some of the work we're actually outsourcing to strategic service providers. It's just the way Yoni is, right? So he's bootstrapped his business. He's been very successful. And as I often say to people, Yoni has not become successful by throwing his money around like a sailor on a Friday night. He's a bit more thought out in the way he goes about things. And I think it's good discipline. So we run a very tight ship. Link has grown month over month, quarter over quarter, year over year. We turn a really healthy profit. We declare dividends and we give back to our shareholders. And I think that's really good discipline. So what we're really talking about is actually just scaling that same approach. And I think that we've had good practice at that.
Right. So ultimately, it'll depend a lot on how many top-level domains you end up running and then kind of deciding from there, but also not hiring ahead of the curve. It sounds like you have some consultants, some service providers helping with applications, things like that, and then see how many come through. Because this round there's a unique difference between this round and last time, right? And that is that last time, when more than one company applied for the same top-level domain, most of the time that was resolved through private resolution. So essentially an auction where the losers got the profit. So let's say there are 5 companies that went up to 20 million and each of the losers got about $5 million, right? So they walked away happy. Person, hopefully who paid the 20 million walked away happy. But you can't do that this time. So how do you think that will impact this round compared to the last round?
Based on what I'm hearing, there seems to be no shortage of appetite. So there seems to be a significant appetite for people to come in and to make applications. I think the difference is that you really you have to have a well thought through plan in terms of your strategy. Which TLDs are you going to apply for? How are you actually going to launch those TLDs into the market? What do you think the price point is on that? What do you think the total addressable market is for any particular TLD? And I think you're going to have to be really careful that you don't overpay in the auction, because I think there's this misconception that these names are going to fly off the shelves. We know from our experience with .link, it's a lot of work. So the success that we're having today is basically a lag indicator of all of the work that we've put in previously. So if you end up in a situation where you submit your application and you overpay for the top-level domain at auction, you could end up in a situation where you're mildly miffed, that you basically overpaid for the TLD.
I think everyone listening to this show has overpaid for a domain in an auction before, and they've been like, I
mean, there's nothing worse, right? You end up being mildly miffed. And then basically what you're going to do is you're going to carry that legacy debt forward into your business. Now, if you prevail in the application, your initial contract period is 10 years. I think with an assumptive right of renewal if you do things the right way. And the way that we're looking at it is this is a 10 to a 20-year play. So that we're factoring that into our calculations. But you're absolutely right. In the past, the losers ended up being the biggest winners because they bagged the cash and they didn't have the responsibility of launching and running the TLDs. And the guys that did prevail, in some instances, were left to try and figure it out and try and make it work. And it's hard. It's not an easy business to be in, I can tell you.
And I think we learned that last time too. I mean, it's kind of funny to me, people having grand ambitions for each top-level domain this year. This time, in 2012, I heard some pretty grandiose predictions and stuff that didn't pan out. So hopefully there's a little bit more of a reality check this time. I also think, last time some of the domains that sold for a lot of money, the people that bought them had made a lot of money losing other ones. So they're kind of like not looking at it on a domain by domain basis, but saying, I've got this funny money, if you will, here. I can apply it to this one, which won't happen.
Well, and I think that's going to have a significant impact, Andrew, on how the auctions play out. So if you're in contention, you go into auction as, a final resort. And depending on how much budget, because this isn't just about how much budget have you got to fund the application.
That's just one part. Yeah.
That's just one part. You have to come with a budget. You have to be prepared to participate in the auction. Then you've got prioritization draw. Once you get through that entire process, and let's say you've got a war chest of, I don't know, let's go 200 million, just as for example. So you've got a war chest of 200 million, and the first TLD that you're in auction for one particular TLD, and there's an established baseline. Some of the TLDs in the last round went for tens of millions of dollars, and I think .shop went for what, 40 plus
40,
million?
Yeah, somewhere around there.
Right? So if you turn up with 200 million, you're first in line in the auction and you spend 40 million, well, then you've only got 160, you've got 160 left. And I think people are going to have to be pretty well thought through in terms of, okay, what are we going to do? Obviously, you've got other would-be applicants who've already telegraphed to the market their intention to bid, who have got significant financial backing. It's public domain. The guys at Unstoppable, for example, they've got some financial backing and they're going to take some beating in auction. So I think it's going to drive people to think very carefully about what they're doing.
I had Matthew Gould, the founder or CEO of Unstoppable, on recently, and he was talking about he's tempering. He doesn't think, especially some of the Web3 names, are worth what some people are going to pay for them. So I think he's like, hey, we're going to be careful here too. We need to we need to think about what the full opportunity is. So.
Wouldn't disagree. I like Matt very much, actually. The more I get to talk to him, the more I like him. And I think, with the downturn in crypto value recently, I think that will have an impact. But I think one of the key messages for people who are thinking about applying, if you're going to pay $227,000 to apply and you don't have enough to cover the auction fees for the particular TLD that you're dead set on, you're not going to get your 227 back. So you really careful in terms of your strategy and how much you just go in eyes wide open is what I would say.
Well, there's another thing to this time that's a little bit different. Even though you can't resolve through private resolution, you can name a backup string that you'd like to go after. But there's some game theory there too. There's some thinking because someone else could have that either as a primary or the secondary. Plus, in your case, if you're going after 200, each application has to have its own backup, right? You can't have a pool of 200 backups, right?
Correct. So you can't have a pool of 200. Your replacement string is tied to the application. And importantly, you cannot switch into contention. So this is going to take some very careful consideration. It really is. So your primary string, and then post-reveal, you've got there is going to be a 14-day window where you can then exercise your right, if you have actually submitted an application with a replacement string, to replace your primary pick with your secondary pick, but the secondary pick must not then take you into a contention set.
And is that contention also with if two secondary picks? Can you have contention there? I'm trying to remember. No.
Because if you're in contention, and if your replacement string is already somebody else's primary, you can't switch into that.
Yeah. So that adds something to it too. Of course, companies they don't have to do a secondary one, or they can just ask for the majority of their money back anyway. But that's a pretty tight window, especially for you, if you've got a couple hundred here to make those decisions. So that will be an action-packed couple weeks.
It's going to be an action-packed couple of weeks, and we've already made the decision that we're actually going to gather together as a business unit, as a team. We're all going to be co-located, and basically we're going to be open for business, right? The idea is we're going to be sat together and we're going to decide which strings are we going to continue with, which, replacement strings. And during that window, we've got a couple of other things that we're thinking about, because part of this is there is a prohibition on dealing or working with business partners. So if you are planning to work with other people, whether that is some kind of strategic business partnership, joint venture or whatever, you can't do that post-reveal. You're not allowed to do that. So we're busy actually having a lot of those conversations up front and in advance.
Sure. I mean, I'm sure, well, first of all, you mentioned some people have said what they're applying for, right? So there's an opportunity to work with companies there. But there's some domains that people are going to apply for, and they're established players in the business that it might make sense to partner with or discuss ahead of time, right? You can talk until reveal day. Is that right?
That is my understanding, yes.
Yeah. So, well, interesting. That'll definitely be a unique aspect here. Plus the fact that all the auctions will be public.
Well, actually, I think it's string confirmation day, actually. I think it's string confirmation day.
Is when you can't talk in. Yeah. Well, I'm sure whatever it is, you will abide by that.
Yeah, we absolutely will.
It's a big guidebook, right? So I shouldn't quiz you on little specific things here.
Well, no, and I think one of the other things that we have actually found a little frustrating is everybody's become an expert with the advent of AI. So they load the applicant guidebook into ChatGPT or whatever their chosen, preferred platform is, but it still requires oversight. And I've been in several meetings where I've basically said, listen, we need to go back to the primary, the authentic source of information is the applicant guidebook. And AI is great, but I also think that there's an inherent danger where people get, I would say, a bit sloppy and a bit over-reliant on technology and occasionally trot out the wrong answers. And given that this is not anybody else's money we're playing with other than Yoni, so it's not institutional cash, I actually feel a great burden of responsibility, Andrew. I really do. That I'm playing with Yoni's money. It's generational wealth. And so we've been in the planning phase now for well over 18 months or more, in actual fact, because we can't afford to get it wrong.
So we've touched on Web3 quite a bit.
Yep.
I know some domains have come out from the previous round that have Web3 capabilities added on in some way. What's your thinking of this? How do you think this progresses in the next round? And do you think there are any potential kind of hiccups with this?
Good question. We've got our own position on this as Nova Registry. And I think you and I have sort of skated around this subject a time or two in various locations, Miami and whatnot. So I think what this really speaks to, Andrew, is responsibly bridging the authority DNS to public ledgers. And a question was raised at the ICANN meeting in Dublin, and it was actually posed to the CEO of ICANN. And the question was, do you think that these Web3 implementations should be subject to an RCEP?
RCEP being the Registry Services Evaluation Policy. So whenever a registry wants to kind of introduce a new feature, they have to file that.
Correct. So, for example, the blocking technologies that are in the market have filed an RCEP. And the question was asked, do you think that these Web3 type technologies should have filed an RCEP, or registry operators that are supporting this type of technology? And the answer back was, yes, we believe they should have done. And given that we have got a vested interest in applying for TLDs that could be Web3 or crypto related in the next round, we would like to see a world whereby there is some kind of common standard adopted in terms of how is this all put together. And for us, this is really more about policy considerations. So we're talking about domain lifecycle management. So when a name is active, what happens when it expires? And I think it comes down to being a responsible operator. I genuinely do. And so I think that there are some solutions in the market that haven't really given too much thought towards this. They don't think about domain lifecycle management. They don't think about rights protection mechanisms. And I think that by doing what they've done, that they actually do run the risk of undermining the stability of the DNS. Now, that's not a world that we want to live in, given that we're about to spend, $40 million in application fees. Nova Registry are going to be filing an RCEP, and the RCEP is going to be about responsibly bridging the authority DNS to public ledgers.
So you're going to file this for .link to see what the response is, essentially.
I think we need to.
Yeah.
And that needs to involve community engagement. So it needs to involve the folks over at ICANN, SSAC, IETF. And I think it's the only responsible thing to do. Because otherwise we could end up in a situation where we invest $15 million in application fees for TLDs that may end up not having as much value as we might think they would. As you put it, is there a bump in the road? and they could very well be. So we'd like to know what that bump looks like. And having socialized this idea with several large registry operators and several large registrars, there seems to be an overwhelming sense of support because people are saying, yeah, it's the elephant in the room. It's not being addressed. And
right. Well, and it's still, I don't think there's been any enforcement action from ICANN even post London, right?
Nope.
Yeah. So you want to know before you put your money behind it, as a company, that you're going to be able to do what you want to do with these top level domains.
Correct. But do it in a responsible manner.
Sure. Yeah.
Not flirting with the stability of the DNS and risking destabilization, because we don't think we're a responsible registry operator. We take great pride in that, actually, Andrew, great pride in it. We're trying to do things the right way. And what we have been encouraged by our peer group who are cheering us on, saying, we can get behind this. We love what you're doing in terms of business development, trying to expand the namespace, the way that you go about your business. And we can totally understand why you would take this approach. And yes, we can get behind it and endorse it. So we do have people that are lining up to get behind this approach.
Do you have enough time to get the RCEP response back? I don't know how, before applications?
Based on ICANN policy, yes.
Okay. Got it. Well, that'll be something to watch for then and watch it go through the process. And I'll be curious what happens there because, like you said, it can have a pretty big impact on which domains people select. And frankly, the overall number of applications to some extent that people file. So,
absolutely.
So another thing that's different this time around is you kind of go in with your registry service provider in your application. So you pick them and they have to be certified by ICANN. They published the original list, I think, some point in January. There's still some trickling in. What do you think about this process here? How is it shaping up?
Well, I think they've had a few technical glitches along the way. I know that from talking to quite a few of the RSPs.
RSP being registry service provider.
Yes, it's not been as smooth as they would have hoped, but I think they're through the worst of it now. I think it's a good thing because if you go back to the last round, I think the application process was a lot more complicated than it will be this time round, because you're able, as part of your application, is you can either designate the RSP that you're going to use, or you can basically check a box and say that we are going to use an authorized RSP. So a big component of the evaluation process has almost been
front-loaded, right? It's been front-loaded onto the RSPs, yeah.
Now, ICANN are actually going to open up the evaluation window again for anybody that wants to become an RSP in post-application window and pre-delegation. So if you haven't made the window now, you will have an opportunity if you want to apply to become an RSP and go through that process pre-delegation. But once you start going through the evaluation process at ICANN, as I understand it, you, as an applicant, you are going to have to designate which RSP you're going to be using.
So let me ask you, if you're applying for this mini, are you going to go with a third-party RSP or are you going to build your own RSP?
TBD. Aspirationally, we do have aspirations of owning our own infrastructure, but it's a non-trivial task. And so there are a couple of elements to this. There's a balance between taking on the cost of building and supporting your own RSP, because even if you are successful in prevailing the applications, doesn't necessarily mean they're all going to get delegated at one time. Probably wouldn't want them to either. You are actually running core infrastructure. You really are. So this is, I say it's a non-trivial task. To my mind, there are a handful of providers in the market. I'm sure some of your listeners will go, there's more than a handful. Yeah, but there is a list. But from our perspective, as a business that is intending to run, I don't know, anywhere between 50, 150 TLDs, we need to have industrial strength platforms, including and not limited to, the tooling, the administration capabilities, the reporting capabilities on these platforms. I've actually looked at a lot of them, and we've boiled it down to a list of a handful, half a dozen that meet the requirements. Some meet it better than others. And then it becomes a function of price.
And the price, I imagine will be significantly less this time than in 2012.
What, in terms of a cost per create and renew?
Yes. Yeah.
I'm not too sure.
Really? Okay.
I'm not too sure. And I'll tell you for why. Because I think people are now starting to understand that this is critical infrastructure. And if you want it done and done properly, there's a cost associated with that. Because I also know what it looks like not to be done properly. And that's not what you want if you're operating.
So you're saying you don't want to go necessarily with the lowest cost. They always say, like, I think what was the anecdote about the guy in the spaceship, one of the early spaceships saying, oh, I know that all the pieces on this went out to the lowest bidder, kind of thing. So you want to make sure that you have the right solution, not necessarily the cheapest.
Correct. But and aspirationally, we would like to run our own RSP. Aspirationally, we are going to have our own registrar. So that's going to happen. It's not going to put us in direct competition with...
Yeah, a lot of registries have a registrar at this point, right? So, and they've managed to walk that line. Yeah.
Well, and I think if you're very honest with people and straightforward and you have clarity in your business dealings, that's a lot easier to accomplish that. Because ultimately, we want to be the ultimate domain name registration authority for the TLDs that we operate. So that means RSP, registry operator, and we would like to have the option to facilitate an easy on-ramp for people to register names, because given our chosen path of developing parallel distribution channels, that has not always been easy, because the majority of registrars are retail registrars, so they're very much storefront, come search your name, add a website builder, email, SSL cert, and the like. But really what we're looking for, really API-driven reseller type registrar, where we can interface with the platforms that we work with and provide them an easy on-ramp. And of course, this is also comes down to economics as well, Andrew, because if we are doing the business development work, we're creating the relationships, we're actually selling people on the idea of selling custom domains. It's quite disheartening when your friendly reseller partner says, well, we'd like to make $2 per name. Well, that's good business if you have not invested in the business development costs. And if that opportunity scales to 100,000 names, 500,000 names, times by $2, it soon becomes a big number very quickly. And that just kills the opportunity in many respects. So for us, it makes economic sense to have that option available to us.
Do you think the choice of RSP will have a big impact on distribution too? Like if the RSP is already connected in, the registrars?
No doubt at all. And we're buddies with our friends over at Identity Digital. I think they've got that down.
Yeah, they have a lot of distribution.
They have a lot of distribution, right? And then there are others who are not quite as well connected. And it's not because they don't have the physical connection. It's actually, are these people visible and present? Are they actively engaged with the registrar community, right? So there's one thing, actually, we've actually got the physical connection, but do they have the relationship connection? And I would say that the people who are probably the best at that at this precise moment are the folks at Identity Digital. And that's not to throw shade on any of the other folks, because we like the folks at Nominet and, we like the folks over at Team Internet, and we like our own provider, Two Cows. But the reality of it is, ID are very geared up in that regard.
Yeah, because, we are looking at, registrars are going to be more selective this time in which domains they add. And the easier you can make it for them, the more likely they will be to integrate.
And I think, yes, and this was something that I was going to raise with you a little earlier in the conversation. There are some registrars now who are already telegraphing to registry operators that they're going to be charging onboarding fees per TLD. And so what that actually means is, and this is something that I actually raised with ICANN actually last year at the Contracted Parties Summit in Hanoi, it's not $227,000 to apply for a TLD. It's not just the amount of money you may have to spend in the auction. have you done your budget and forecast in terms of how much it's going to cost you to onboard these TLDs at certain registrars? And the numbers that are getting bandied about are in the tens of thousands of dollars per TLD, right? And I'm hearing numbers, $50,000 for a TLD. Now, if you look at somebody like us, if we end up with let's say we end up with 100 TLDs and it's $50,000 per TLD to onboard at one registrar, that's a significant, I would say, tariff or tax to get, very topical subject, obviously, but it really is a tariff to get your product on the shelf and distributed. And what am I actually getting in return for that? And that in part also speaks to the rationale. As a single TLD operator, it's very hard as a single TLD operator to get mind share and shelf space with some of these registrars. It would appear to be a little easier if you're a portfolio operator. And so that's part of the rationale is we basically need to put some muscle mass on our business effectively by having more TLDs, ideally ones that people want to buy, right? So this comes down
to... Sure. If registrar customers are saying, why can't I register this domain with you? That could certainly sway things. Yeah,
absolutely. So, and that's why we're applying for high intent TLDs, got a clear use case. And part of our secret sauce is actually our ability to monetize these TLDs. And
what do you mean by that?
Well, our ability to leverage the value from the TLD. It wouldn't be secret sauce if I told you, because then all the listeners are...
But you're teasing me here, Vaughn. You're teasing me.
Exactly. It would be the not so secret sauce at that point, wouldn't it? But then people are going to have, registrars are going to have to make a decision. Are we going to take these TLDs? If there's high intent and demand and there's a clear use case, are we going to impose a tariff to onboard this or not? Because we may, in the end, may say, well, it's not really worth it. We've got alternate distribution channels that can serve us equally, if not better than the existing. And I did raise this with ICANN, and they said to me that they were not aware that registrars were planning to impose these kinds of fees.
Well, I mean, they already have on some of the latecomers, right? I mean, I've heard of several instances of registries paying to get integrated with registrars. So,
well, and we've been there ourselves.
Yeah. Okay. Well, there you go. Confirmation.
You already know what that looks like.
And then even if you get in, I know that some registrars have kind of a bidding system to get, but it's kind of like Google AdWords to get shown, right, as a result.
Yeah. And ultimately, we don't think that the ROI on that is as good as it could be for a variety of reasons. Lack of traffic, because ultimately, and I understand the rationale behind these platforms where you're bidding for placement. They're actually in turn relying on the customer to recognize something they want to buy and understand the value of that particular name. And that's made all the more difficult when that particular approach to doing business is then run in conjunction with rebates, discounts, promotions. So you're paying for the privilege to promote a product that you're highly discounting. Simple economics is it's much harder to drive an ROI. And registry operators, even though we are somewhat competitive, we do talk to each other. And the consensus of opinion is that none of us are overjoyed with the results that we're getting.
From those pay-for-placement kind of setups.
Yeah. Generally speaking, nobody's getting a very good ROI. So anybody in registrar land listening to this that can really make that work, I think you've got a significant number of friends, us included, who'd be, running towards you saying, please help us sell our domains. The alternative doesn't work very well for people at the minute.
Yeah. Well, I know we're running a little long, but I do want to talk about a big elephant in the room that a lot of people are talking about, which is how artificial intelligence is going to change the domain name industry. I'm curious what your thoughts are here, just broadly. Yeah.
I think it's a good thing.
Okay.
I genuinely do. I think artificial intelligence is good for domains. And I also think artificial intelligence or domains are good for artificial intelligence.
Okay.
And the reason that I say that, you can't really have one without the other. That's the truth of the matter.
Well, and I guess there are multiple markets here too, right? There's a question of how important, you're obviously a big proponent of some non.com options because you'll be going after them. Will the premium and the aftermarket be there for these big valuable names when agents are making decisions, for example, is a question I have out there that I've seen people put out there.
I believe that to be the case. I suspect that the agents may be more capable of making a more informed decision based on larger data sets, actually. And I think if you think about it, the automation, the ability to be a bit more creative in your choices, I think it's a good thing. And I think there's going to be mass adoption of domains as a result of AI. Where I was talking to somebody last week, I had a brief meeting with a former colleague of mine who was telling me he was vibe coding. I mean, there's just no way 5 years ago he's not a vibe coder, but with the advent of this type of technology, he's able to create opportunity for himself very easily, but in domain name to get that idea online and make it productive.
I'll tell you, Vaughn, I don't code. I know basic HTML, but this past weekend, I built an app for creating some of the posts on Domain Name Wire, not for writing them, but coming up with the data. And it's something I'd done manually for years, but to hire a coder would have taken a lot of time and $5,000 or $10,000. In 90 minutes, I built this app that will help me run the numbers on this. And again, I can't code, so it is impressive what new opportunities are out there.
It's almost the equivalent of opening up banking to the unbanked.
Yeah.
If you think of it in that way, people that were prohibited from entering the market because of the lack of coding skills, that barrier has been reduced dramatically. I would go on to say that I think the things that we need to be thinking about are abuse as it relates to names being registered by.
Yes.
Also, what can you do to mitigate that risk, right? So if you have a runaway bot, for example, registering 100,000 names, because now you've got ICANN fees that are incurred, registrar, registry, you've got RSP fees. It's pretty easy to get up to $1 per name just in hard costs alone. So if you've got a rogue bot that goes off and registers 100,000 names, somebody's going to end up with $100,000 bill somewhere, split registry, registrar, and an RSP. So we've been thinking through, how do you mitigate that risk? Abuse management's definitely one. Pre-funded accounts is definitely another way. In other words, they've got some kind of credit limit. In other words, they can't, if the account is only pre-funded, let's say $10,000, that's all the bot can spend. So going back to one of your earlier questions, and you've managed to tease out of me one of our sort of little nuggets and plans. Why have we decided to be the first to announce support of USDC? That will become very important further down the line.
Right.
Because that's how the bots are going to basically take money from pre-funded accounts, probably using that kind of currency. So in answer to your question, do I think it's going to have a positive impact on the industry? Yes. I think it's going to have positive impact for the masses, not just the lucky guy that owned AI.com or the lucky guy that owned bot.ai.
Yeah.
I think this levels the playing field, and I think it opens it up to a much wider audience. I really do.
All right. So final question. You're planning to apply for about a couple hundred. Obviously, we've talked about some of the things that'll make a difference in how many you end up applying for. I've heard of someone else applying for 100. You've got .brands. You've got all these portfolio players. You think the round application-wise will be about the same as last time? A couple thousand?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's the consensus I'm getting from most people. So it'll be interesting to see. This is going to be a fun year, busy year for you, and it'll be a busy year for me following what everyone's doing. So it'll be a lot of fun.
A real pleasure to have the opportunity to share with you some of our thoughts and ideas. We hold Domain Name Wire in very high regard, so, and you individually.
All right. Well, thanks, Vaughn. That has been a wrap on this week's Domain Name Wire podcast. My guest has been Vaughn Liley, General Manager of Nova Registry. You can listen to all previous episodes at dnw.com/podcast or on your favorite podcast app. Thanks for listening.